Morning, afternoon, sorry, it's 1 o'clock. Director Hanegraaff, can you hear us? Awesome, thank you. How about you, Director Hewitt? If either of you can unmute, or Director McLaren-Co, or staff.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you, Director Hanegraaff. McLaren-Co, you want to check your sound?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks. Okay, we're just about to start. We got 2 minutes, and we'll just give it 2 minutes. We do have, I'm just going to check our committee membership for a minute. I'm going to mute us. Director Vandenberg, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I'll be right back. All right, good afternoon, folks. We will go ahead and start our meeting. I'm going to begin with our traditional land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and respect the Indigenous people within whose traditional lands we are meeting today. And I'm going to just hop over there. I think for this committee, directors, by all means, just speak if you need to. I'm not going to keep my Zoom chat open all the time. So by all means, you can just unmute and speak if you want a second or get added to the speakers list. Okay. I will call for a motion to adopt the agenda, but I'm going to request that we add one item, the terms of reference. So if anyone likes to move the motion to adopt the agenda, thank you, Hewitt, seconded Hanegraaff. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So that'll be item, I think it's 7.2. Great. I'm going to just flip over to the agenda here. For receipt of the minutes, I am going to make a couple corrections. And this doesn't require a motion, just for the directors on the line. But Maya will correct them for our records. So the first correction is Hanegraaff also represents Castlegar. So that just needs to be added to Hanegraaff's list there. And then for Hewitt, we just need to add Nelson. The city of Nelson, not Nelson the planner. And for commission members present, we'll just move Stuart Horn up to the member section and out of the staff section. And then I'll just check with directors. Did you notice any other corrections to the minutes? Okay, so that's just direction to staff. Oh yeah, Hewitt, go ahead. I saw your hand.
Just the spelling of my last name. It's got two, you've got it listed in some places with 2 T's. It's only one.
Okay.
So under 3. Anyhow, if somebody could correct that, that would be super. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, good catch. Thank you. Okay then. So then I gotta flip my screen again. We've got the minutes, so we'll hand it over to Dan to go over the staff report with us. And I'll go back to Zoom and I'll be able to watch chat in your hands. Okay, over to you, Dan.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me well if I'm just speaking through outside of my computer? Yeah, great, super. Yeah, so what we wanted to provide to the committee is an update on what we were up to in 2024, as well as having a look at what we're planning for 2025. That includes a couple of areas of concern in terms of policies and programs that have come down from the province recently. So I'll kick into with just giving a seasonal update, which is a reminder of the context that we work in when it comes to emergency management. So looking at the winter season and into the spring season that we're going to be going into, the temperatures are really seasonal at this point, and there haven't been any major flood hazards. Sometimes at this time of year, what happens is as we get rainfall that comes down on top of snow, we'll often get a fall freshet. Right now, they didn't see anything that was going to be significant in terms of rainfall and snow, and so we're in good shape from that standpoint. One of the concerns that happens following a wildfire season is that we have an increased risk in terms of geohazard, and that would, in our case, where we had 3 kind of significant areas of fire that were above residential areas, would have been around that Comanco, Ponderosa, Mulvey, and Argenta fire. And we've received, the way that it works is the Ministry of Forest conducts a post-wildfire risk assessment to assess how the risk has shifted since the wildfires. And the ministry has so far provided, I think it's actually 4 now since this report, but there's 3 that are written in this report that are Argenta, Ponderosa, and Comanco. So that was to the east of a village of Slocan. We also have the Mulvey fire, which was to the west of the village of Slocan. And Argenta is self-explanatory, and Comanco was the fire that was to the southeast of Silverton. And what those particular reports are level 2 reports, so they get done by the Ministry of Forests. And then sometimes based on those reports, there's a level 3 report that comes out that's a more detailed report from geotechnical assessors. And there are a few areas that have been highlighted as potentially of interest for that, but nothing confirmed yet from the Ministry of Forests. We're also looking at a winter of La Nina, which usually means more precipitation and colder. And at the same time, we're entering into winter as drought level 3. And if you think of I forget the exact date, but in July, we were at a level 4. So we started level 3 and went to level 4 in July, and then our fires kicked in. So we're already entering into winter at level 3. This doesn't mean that we're going to be necessarily at a high drought level coming into next spring or next summer. It'll really depend on a lot of factors. A lot of factors come into play in terms of how much snow we do receive, how quickly it melts, how much rain we received at the exact same time come spring. So we may, the ground may swell a lot more than we're currently at, but it's an interesting piece of information to know that going into winter, we're starting at level 3.
Can I just ask,
Of course.
do you want questions as we go?
I would say so.
Okay.
Why not?
Can I interject for one procedure thing? I'm just wondering, May, are you able to change it so that people can message everyone? And that's just usually how I monitor chat.
Absolutely. I think use the mouse there.
Oh,
If you go to the chat little arrow corner.
here, I'll just kind of.
Sorry.
No, thank you. It's something I should have noticed at the beginning. So that's, sorry folks, that's just procedurally. I had questions on the reports from the Ministry of Forest on the kind of post-fire. So those were my questions, but I first wanted to check in for the directors on the line. Did you have any questions on what Dan has provided so far? Just do hands because I'm not using chat right now. Okay. So I had two questions on them. I think they can be two questions. First was, where are we at in the reports? Like, I know there's the kind of like high level and then they drill down to detail. Are we anticipating more reports from them? And if so, is the detail based on risk? Is that when we get a more detailed report? And the second component was in terms of like community engagement. I know in Argenta they had one. And it was really the ministry leading that conversation. It was not us. But when does that switch over to us, and or do we encourage the ministry to make sure they check back with the community on what the reports say? So it's kind of the general aspect, with the main question really being, where are our highest risk areas and are they at a risk point that we need to be addressing mitigation?
Okay, so we are expecting more. So again, there's level 2 and level 3. So the ones that we've currently received are level 2 reports. There are some of those areas that are flagged for level 3. I don't know what those are yet, or it hasn't been finalized yet. I am expecting more level 2 reports to come in. The way that the Ministry of Forests has explained it to us is they work on a risk basis. So they start by doing the level 2 reports for the highest risk areas, which is why Argenta, Ponderosa, and Comancos were the first ones.
Okay.
And from there, they're going to continue the level 2 reports and are going to start the level 3 reports. We're probably going to get them at some point in the winter, is what I've understood from our colleagues at Ministry of Forests. And the other part to that is that the risk over the winter isn't very high.
Right.
So we not that it's very high, but we get a bit of a pause or a little moment of reprieve where we can wait for those reports to come out before there's anything that ends up happening. I know that the CSRD has done some different work in terms of establishing monitoring tools to be able to understand whether or not there's going to be overland flooding or a slide that's going to happen. My communication with Ministry of Forests, from their standpoint, there are tools, they're interesting tools. The tools operationally from a monitoring standpoint aren't necessarily helpful, because the amount of time that you get between the time that if you're using a sensor-based setup where the sensor says we're having an event, you have minutes before you can send out an evacuation order or an alert. So not necessarily a helpful tool. When we use monitoring tools that are based on modeling, what I've understood from Ministry of Forests is that you often get false positives. So based on the models, you're going to be told that you're going to have a flood event, but then there's no event that happens. So we run the risk of warning people too often or making that like crying wolf event starting to happen. So I think there's more exploration to do there. From Ministry of Forest standpoint, they think there's no risk or there's no action that needs to be taken right away. To your other question, what mitigation we should be doing, there isn't a lot of mitigation that can be done for the kind of work or the kind of hazard increase that's happened. The hazard also only lasts for roughly 3 to 5 years. Excuse me, or the increased risk in the hazard only lasts for 3 to 5 years. So there's a question there in how much you want to invest for something that's going to be short term.
Okay.
You had another question in there that I have not answered.
I think the primary thing with the
The public meetings.
yeah, sorry, and I shouldn't just go back and forth like that. Go ahead.
So for the public meetings, we're happy to do them. The Ministry of Forests is happy to do them. Typically, it would be them that would be running that kind of process through, and we can request it at any time.
Okay.
The recommendation when I'd spoken to the Ministry of Forests earlier this fall was to wait until we get a level 3 detailed report, so that there's more information that's more substantial, and that we then go to community and present it at that point.
Okay. Susan, I see you. I'm going to do a quick supplemental and then I'll go to you. And sorry, I'll thank you for the hand. With not so many screens, I can't see them. So my quick supplemental is just that I did read the CSRD notice because I was curious based on what they were doing, where they were assessing it. From what I could tell, they were much higher level risk, and they were further down the line on those reports in terms of like they had a level 3 report indicating imminent risk. So that was kind of the conclusion I came to as to when that equipment can be helpful if you have an imminent risk that you're aware of, and they seem to be, that was my assumption, so that's why I wanted to ask about it. I think if anything, our mitigation work should really be focused, and it's not mitigation so much as public awareness of what to look for, which we've done since Johnson's Landing, but I don't think we could ever be not doing it enough to make sure people know what to look for and what number to call when you see that. So I think that there's some publications that we can just keep pushing out on that front. So go ahead, and then I'll go to Director Hewitt.
Let's get through the chair. Probably.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I'm fine.
Thanks. So yes, so they're a little bit farther ahead. The CSRD made a decision to hire BGC through taxation in order to get that level 3 report sooner. So they got their level 3 report through BGC as opposed to going through Ministry of Forests. That's what it looks like to the Ministry of Forests. Their ministry was actually unsure as to why they made that decision, but they made that decision. From the emergency management standpoint, what we do once we receive those reports, we post them on our website. We also do a direct mailing to all the properties that are within that have increased risk. So each of the property owners does receive a mailing that includes the report itself and also includes a top sheet that says, here's some things to look out for, here's some things not to do, and here's a phone number to call if you do see something.
Okay, great. Director Hewitt, go ahead.
Thank you. My question is, so we're in drought level 3, and I understand what you said about it it's not going to be, typically wouldn't be that come the spring, but if it does persist, and I didn't see it addressed in the report, but are they also monitoring for, I don't know what the terminology is, but sleeper fires or ghost fires that could, because the fires were so intense that and lasted so long, that could be a threat. And is there education happening regarding those? Because I'm sure we've all heard about them cropping up in the next year.
Yeah. Overwintering fires happen. From what I've seen on most of our fires is that they were actually declared out. So it's hard to tell what is going to be coming in the spring. And at that point, we're going to take advice from BC Wildfire Service on how to react to them.
I know that with the Fry Creek fire, which was 2 years ago, that one was noted as one that was likely going to pop up again because it was so late in the season and it had a lot of ground aspect to it. And I believe we had notification on that. So I would assume that they've determined they're out and they're not like, I know Fry Creek was one I was paying attention to in the spring, and I think that's why. And just one other note, when we had and Tanya and Ian were there, when we had our EPC meeting, I don't remember who it was, but someone said as of October 24th, we had been changed to a drought level 2 on October 24th.
They do go up and down.
They fluctuate. Okay, I just remember seeing the 2 and thinking, oh, it's a little better. Okay, McLaren Cove, Vandenberg, we're good to, and Hennegraph, we can let Dan keep going. Okay. Go ahead, Dan.
Great. So this is continuing to the 2024 update. So sharing a little bit about what we've done. So I split this into the 4 phases of emergency management. So you guys get that we continue to talk about emergency management as those 4 phases of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So from a mitigation standpoint, we were working with wildfire mitigation and developing the community wildfire resiliency plans, and we did 5 different, I think it was 5, maybe it's 6, I think it was 5 last year. I might have that number wrong. Nora will correct me if I've got that wrong. And then we're in the planning phase to get more completed this year, and we're at the we're just finalizing some of the contracting details at this point. We had also a spectacular Fire Smart year with 527 assessments, and that includes some of the municipal partners that we work with in terms of Fire Smart. So 438 of those assessments were within the RDCK electoral areas only. And there were almost $300,000 in rebates that were delivered to residents who had assessments and then did fire smarting around their homes, and 180,000 of those. And these numbers weren't totally final for the entire season. There will be a more substantial report on fire smart, but this was just to give the committee a sense of where we were with fire smart. And had 27 neighborhoods that were recognized as part of the program, and then 20 that were established. For flood mitigation, there's been some very good work done in the Crescent Valley with the Crescent Valley Flood Management, or it's still called partnership, it's not a partnership, working group. And we're at the point of contracting for engineering designs there. There's work that's continuing as the board had heard about around Duhamel Creek, and we're at a phase of still analyzing what we're going to be doing there. And there's a question around, just from my standpoint, from a management standpoint, with flood mitigation, at what point do we want to start considering establishing a service, given the amount of work and staff time that goes into just preparing work or thinking through or strategizing flood mitigation without necessarily having a service connected to it at this point. The risk tolerance policy is something that's been in process for at least a year, and we're at a stage where the RFP should be going out in December to tender, and then that work actually being completed in 2025. Should I stop at each of the? I could stop at each phase.
I'll just check in and see. Is there any questions on that section or anything you want to add, Nora? I'll just check with Nora C. Vandenberg.
Through the chair, nothing at this time, but I'll take Director Vandenberg's question.
Okay, we'll go Vandenberg and then McLaren Co. Go ahead, Kelly.
Great,
Vandenberg,
thank you.
sorry.
Through the chair. So my computer warbled a little bit when you were describing wildfire mitigation. What is CWRP? I missed that. And what does mitigation look like for Area C?
Nora, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, through the chair. So CWRP is Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. Those are previously called Community Wildfire Protection Plans, and that name was changed in the last year. So for Area C, currently we've been focusing on the resiliency of residents through fire smart programming. Requirement to access additional funding or new funding for wildfire risk reduction work is updating the CWRP. So that's been a priority. That's taken a little bit of time to work with BC Wildfire through this fall to clarify some of the spatial requirements around updating of these plans. And so we have that clarification in their proceeding. We also work in collaboration. There's both a regional roundtable for a wildfire risk reduction and a roundtable for the Creston Valley, where we discuss collaboration and work that's going on. So the RDCK is a part of that work, but there are also other entities that are involved. So for example, the Provincial Wildfire Risk Reduction Program through BC Wildfire is also addressing wildfire risk reduction on Crown land.
Supplemental?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly Vandenberg.
Yeah,
Feeling
so
very informal today.
does the collaboration also include conversation around prescribed or traditional burns as a way of reducing fuel load, probably complements the Fire Smart program?
Yeah, it does. So absolutely, treatment areas are now assessed. So where years ago we started in a hand field treatment approach, then we moved to include more mechanization where there were saw logs or emergible timber. And now definitely the prescribed fire where applicable is also looked at as a tool, depending on the stand type and density and location. So sometimes a treatment area may need preliminary treatment and then can be burned with prescribed fire, but needs that treatment first just to reduce some of the vegetation load.
Right. And who does that work? Is that contracted? Because traditional burns is bringing in First Nations. Prescribed is typically other than First Nations. So who would be doing the work?
So the BC Wildfire and have been working together with First Nations, and I believe there was a burn that occurred with Yakinuki, with Lower Kootenay Band, and there also have been a number in the East Kootenay. So there is some collaborative work happening there. Generally, BC Wildfire has been undertaking the prescribed fire in the RDCK electoral areas, but again, there's been some collaboration with some of the municipal partners in also educating burn bosses on some of our fire departments within the RDCK.
Thank you, Nora.
Director Vandenberg, if it helps, so we approved a couple of the CWRPs for like A, E, and D, I believe, last early spring. And so they're a template that you can take a look at to see what it would look like for you. They're the baseline the province needs for us to actually apply for funding. If we don't have it, we don't have the basis for applying for whatever work we might want to do. What I found really fascinating with my most recent CWRP was being able to identify all the different players on the landscape, because we are not generally the ones that would be the lead, especially in the Crown. But we can be, the CWRP sets the foundation for what's the data saying. And so we get to do that. And then depending on tenure holders, depending on, generally we don't work in private property, but there's all those different pieces then come to play once you get a more specific CWRP. And it will also identify who is the player in that specific area that might be taking a lead on something. So it does help illustrate what are not straightforward answers sometimes.
Great. I would love to look into more on that CWRP and the process. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll send you a copy of D's. It might be one of the biggest, so yours should be shorter. McLaren Co., go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was heartened to see all the numbers on FireSmart, the uptake and the amount of funding that went out in rebates this year. And I was wondering if staff could speak to what the plans are for the forecast is for next year, and if they have any challenges in delivering that program across the region.
Go ahead, Nora, or whoever.
Through the chair, the intent would be to deliver the same program next year. We'll be providing a report to board to update on the activities of 2024 and what we're planning for 2025 or proposing for board approval for 2025. One of the challenges that we faced this year was that we still had rebate applications, but we ran out of rebate dollars. And we are going to be doing a final review of the budget. We may be able to find a few more dollars to allocate, but it's something that we approached other funders on. But it will be finding that balance for 2025 in how we allocate the rebate dollars, and we may be looking for board direction on further refining what categories and the dollar amounts are eligible for rebates. So, but great to see resident engagement, great to see the uptake, and again, a record-setting level of assessments. We will be seeing the BC FireSmart take over this program from FireSmart Canada in 2025. So continue to be delivered through the RDCK. It'll be the same program, but with a different name, the BC Wildfire Mitigation Program and Wildfire Mitigation Assessment rather than a Home Partners Assessment. And again, we'll be doing some messaging for residents on that. But the overall delivery model with our seasonal mitigation specialist and FireSmart coordinator has been something that's been very successful and mirrored throughout the province. So not looking to make changes there.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It does remind me to let the committee know, because we haven't met in so long, and we do have McLaren Co., who's new to the committee. Even previous, we haven't met a lot. This committee is really like an oversight check-in on the work plan. A lot of this we are going to replicate at board when we get those specific reports, and we'll have more info. So just so you know, it's not the same as board. I mean, ask questions, we'll go through it, but our purpose here is really more of an overall on the work plan. And then once we, Edma's finished and we can actually update our terms of reference, we'll have a bit more of a defined role. So just for the new folks on the committee, this conversation is not going to be absent of the board getting all the same information and actually more. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I don't have any other questions right now, so just do response and recovery and then we'll pause for questions. Does that work?
Sure, I'll start with preparedness.
Or, yeah.
Still good. Okay, awesome. From a preparedness standpoint, so that's the idea of us being able to be ready to respond to various different types of hazards and disasters that we might be encountering. Last year, we had a continuation of the Emergency Preparedness Committee meetings. And going into 2025, we're going to be looking at a different model and based on feedback that we received from our partners, partner agencies that are that join the EPC meetings, and seeing how we can refresh it. We also have applied for a CEP grant, which go to board to be able to get funding for training and also equipment for the training piece was on those low frequency, high risk events that we'd have to respond to. That we've gotten pretty used to as an EOC getting into wildfires and floods. They happen on an ongoing basis. We know who our partners are, which agency to kind of reach out to, but there are certain events that happen that are more unique and happen much less frequently that are consequently more challenging for us to react to because we don't have as much muscle memory on how to do it. So we're looking to continue training or to get training on that. Another piece that has kind of emerged as a need and an opportunity to refine the program is developing an annual training calendar that looks at all the different audiences that are engaged in emergency management with the regional district, from EOC staff to elected officials to our municipal partners and also to agencies that we work with, and developing a calendar for 365 days of the year and seeing how to engage each of those groups and getting very clear with objectives and skills and knowledge that we want to train for each of those groups throughout the year. And we're looking to doing that in 2025. This is a continuation of something we started in 2024. And in 2024, which was also connected to the CRC, the Community Resilience Coordinator position, which used to be Donna Ditson's position, we started developing an annual communication calendar for preparedness in our community. That got a little bit delayed as a result of staff turnover, but it's something that we're going to be picking up in 2025, as well as looking at different plans for newly emerging hazards like heat and cold events. If I think back to July 17th, we were coming into the EOC to have a conversation about a heat event that was going to be happening. And then on July 17th, we had a massive lightning storm that triggered the rest of the summer, and we started to forget about how bad it was because our attention got thrown elsewhere. In 24, we continued with the Neighborhood Emergency Preparedness Program, and I'll speak about it a little bit later on, but we want to put a lot more emphasis in 2025 on continuing to develop the NAP. So that's actually very exciting. Moving into response, the EM program did provide a summary of the EOC activation. This is just a reiteration of that to be able to show what we had done. I won't get into detail about it other than to say it was one of the more, although it wasn't necessarily very long, like when you consider 31 days of activation or of level 3 activation at least, it was very, very intense. And it was some of the more intense that has been experienced at the RDCK, especially considering that we had 4 local authorities that were engaged in the wildfires this summer. And then also, like I talked about the board, the other part to emphasize is how much staff and staff time it ended up taking. And I know that this has come up in other committee meetings, just the impact that has on the organization, and then how that leads into 2025 and trying to better understand what kind of scheduling and model we've come up with that takes into consideration the drain that the EOC can have on the rest of the organization and other departments' workloads. ESS, emergency support services, also were in full force this summer with the wildfires. But outside of that, we also responded to, and I think it was 7 in the end, by the time this report got published, 7 level 1 responses, which would include more like a house fire or single events that have smaller consequences, large consequences, big consequences for a single household. But and I also wanted to include the different activation levels because I sometimes talk about that, and it gives you a sense of how we organize as an emergency management program to staff our EOC. And what we try to do is we have 3 EPCs now, as well as myself and Nora, and how we can organize to try to respond to as many hazards just within the emergency management program. But then as the event escalates, becomes more significant in terms of geography, involves more agencies, we increase the number of staffing, we increase the type of coordination that it takes with other agencies. And there you go. So I wanted to share that. And
Do you want, let's pause here.
Sure.
Before this response is a whole other conversation. I do want to note I've got Hewitt Vandenberg, and just to note that in the 12 years I've been here, that was the most intense emergency season we have ever had. And I think previous to that, it would have been Johnson's Landing. And this was still more intense than that. Not to say one's better, it's not a better or worse. It's just, it's indicative of an unfortunate pattern. Hewitt, then Vandenberg.
Thank you. My question is around training of, you're talking about partners and the staff workload at the regional district when there is an emergency. Concern has been raised around our table that our councils in our community aren't as prepared, and they're not sure what we need to be doing to be prepared. Is there some way that, I know it adds to workload, but to come and talk to council and staff to see what can be done to assist in that regard, because it is our community, if it's Caslow, and we want to, and people would be looking to us. I know you work like a well-oiled machine, but people want to know that their local elected officials are knowledgeable and know what has to happen in emergency, not just the regional district who looks after us in that regard, which is truly appreciated. We need to have that because we don't have the skill set, but we do need to have that knowledge to be able to speak to it, to our constituents, and not speaking for the EOC. I understand that role, and I have articulated that to our council, that whose role it is to speak. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you, through the chair. Absolutely. It was one of the gaps that was identified this summer. Interestingly, our exercise that we ran in the spring was an interaction between a municipality and a regional district, and an event that spanned both those local authorities. So we got to practice it, and then we got to live it with 3 different municipalities over the summer. And we learned a lot in terms of what needs to happen for training from an elected official standpoint and senior staff standpoint, and also emergency management staff standpoint and utility staff standpoint in the different municipalities. So it's one of the audiences that is going to be considered in the annual training plan. And because, and I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but the short answer is yes. Yeah, because there is a gap.
Was there something you were wanting to add, Ian? You looked like you were excited about that question.
Not that I really had anything to add, but I completely agree with what Dan's saying. It's a gap. And, attending the EPC meetings, I was fortunate enough to attend all of the EPC meetings. And it's a common theme that came out of every one of them, that there's a desire for some education and some information sharing there.
I think, because Director Hewitt and I were at the same meeting for that one, I think you raised it there as well, and it was noted. If anything, the difficulty is, of course, we have 7 municipalities in the program. So going to each council could be a bit challenging, but ideally, if there's going to be a training, it can coordinate in a way that you bring as many councillors in as possible for the learning opportunities. Because it does help, even if it's readily available on a piece of paper, it's not the same. So I appreciate that, Director Hewitt, and I really appreciate that I've just seen your work plan, and I can appreciate you guys can account for the fact that those councils actually rely on you to give them that info. Vandenberg, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So I think just to add a little bit onto Susan, what she was mentioning, and I caught the verbiage organizational drain. That's sort of been the key thing for me when you look at the resources needed to manage and mitigate this particular fire season, and certainly learning, you use the word gaps, identifying the gaps to be able to go forward in the next season. And it just kind of occurs to me there perhaps is some opportunities. Now, I want to preface this by just noticing in my preparation for this meeting, I didn't see this Emergency Operations Center operational guidelines. So I haven't been able to go through it to determine how each of the identified staffing positions, minimum requirements, what their roles are in all of this. So I'll be interested to do that after this meeting. But my thought was, we have a lot of competent committees in our backyards that do a number of things, APHC, our water services, our agricultural advisory. And some of these people do have a pretty good background and knowledge. Just a thought, in order to close up some of the gaps, why would we not look at exploring the formation of some local committees to be a part of that resource in the event of. And certainly your communication link would be accelerated in that as well. Just a thought as I'm going through this. So no real question, just want to emphasize that I really noticed in the organizational drain, it had some unfortunate occurrences of not getting work done that I think we need to identify further in gaps and try to clear some of those gaps up.
Yeah, through the chair, I 100% agree. And I mean, I was an organizational development consultant for 18 years. And one of the things I did was organizational design and trying to understand putting the right resources with the right skills in the right place at the right time. And I have not yet cracked the EOC nut. And what's challenging is that the world that we're in is changing. And the frequency, extent of hazards and the type of hazards that we're encountering are not like we've had in the past. So I think we're still in a model where it was a less frequent and shorter term event. And at the end of the day, we were actually, even though this was one of a very difficult summer, it wasn't 120 days of fires, and it could have been. So how we do it is definitely something that we need to get creative with. I don't know that it's going to be, I don't know how to involve people just outside of local authorities, because there might be a model where there's people coming in, or there's staff that are coming in from municipalities. There might be a model where we're sharing staff between regional districts. There might be a model where we've got a clear scheduling process that people are 7 days in the EOC, 7 days back in their regular jobs. There are challenges, there's pros and cons to all those different models, and it's something that we need to look at this year.
I think there's a couple of notes to add to that. One is, planning for emergencies is a catch-22. I think like last year, we really lucked out. I thought for sure last year was going to be a bad year because we had drought. We didn't. This year we got it. We don't ever know if it's going to start with a flood and then move into fire season, which has occurred as well, or fire then direct into floods. It's difficult to predict those things. But there are a couple of committees that I think I want to emphasize as being, when we hear from, like in Castle, we had a completely ad hoc, I call them the ad hoc ESS team, because they weren't formally ESS trained, but they pulled together to like deal with a bunch of things that were just way more details than ESS could handle in that time, and they were incredible. But in my post conversation with them, I really talked to them about like each and every one of you should really do the ESS training so that you can just walk in the door and be immediately a part of the system instead of creating your own system when it occurs. And so the ESS committees are the first ones that, you know, especially right now in our communities where the public's like, emergencies, how do we prepare? You know, besides your own home, look at the committees that do exist that require training so that, you know, when we have an activation, John can say, here's my 10 people that are ready to roll. We need more people in those committees to be able to do what they need to do to deal with evacuees. So that's the first place I direct people. It also makes sure that they're vetted and they know the system, and you're not then training while dealing with an emergency. So that's one way. And I just wanted to note that because I think ESS really needs to be promoted well more than we do, because it's only important when we have an emergency. We need to get it well before that. Go ahead, Vandenberg. I see you unmuted.
And if I may, I totally agree with that. We have some people in our community that all they have the know-how in the background. Say our volunteers are POCs, for example, and others that if they knew about this, if they knew this was a real thing, an opportunity, you might be surprised at how many people would want to turn out and subscribe to some of that ESS training, including myself. It's been a while since I've been a firefighter, but I still know that the smoke goes, that red stuff is hot and the smoke keeps rising. So that never changes.
Well, it's a good note for as we get into the next section, because there's actually quite a bit on the work plan in terms of what's the section called, response. And I'll just note that we do ESS recruitment, but maybe it's a note for John to think about how do we get that word out a little more. And sometimes it's like Vandenberg and I directly talking to people that are like, hey, I was interested. Okay, here's the thing. And you give it to them directly, and that's how they see it. But I don't have any other questions at this time. So I think the response section was what I found most interesting, because is that where we are? No, sorry, we're on.
We'll speak to recovery.
Recovery. That was the, sorry, recovery has a lot going on and it's quite interesting. Go ahead, Dan.
Sure. So recovery is that kind of, it's one of those phases that starts to happen during the response where we start thinking about what the impacts were of a particular event or of a particular hazard. For us this summer, obviously the wildfires were a biggest consequence. And we did, there's two parts to it. So one is the part that's around community recovery, and what are we going to be doing for the communities that were most impacted by wildfires? And in our minds, we've split that into three different geographies: that northern Spokane area, southern Spokane area, and the Argenta area. And this is the one where we've hired Collier's project leaders to work with Ian, who's in this case, our recovery manager, and Collier's, who is the consultant firm who's helping us shape structure and then coordinate the recovery process with the different agencies, nonprofits that come in to support community directly. And maybe you can speak a little bit more about that. And I'll just kick in first with the second part that we've been doing, which is learning from the summer that we've had. And the idea behind that is how do we adapt our processes for the betterment into the future? And we've split that into 4 sections, which I feel like I've talked about a lot of times, but the EOC, working between our partners with, and then the third is with elected officials and senior staff from affected local authorities, and the fourth is going to be with residents. And just this week, so yesterday and the day before, we had the first 2 parts of that after action review. And it's already been excellent. Like from the staffing standpoint, what really stood out is that we're in a state of refinement as opposed to rebuilding when it comes to the EOC, as well the degree of commitment and knowledge and skills in a group that is present in the regional district to take on the positions in the EOC is absolutely incredible. It was reflected back to us by the consulting firm as well. It's really rare that you have people that are, say, in a logistics role who are normally in resource recovery thinking about their EOC job or role, should it come up, and wanting to get together and think through how they can better their particular section. The agency, the interagency workshop also had that idea of refinement over rebuilding, and it was, what really struck me is that every agency that spoke was looking at solutions as opposed to finger pointing. So it really felt like we were in it together, and it wasn't just a regional district response, which felt really, really good, and I think was a lot based on the relationships that have been built throughout this year and previous years, and responses that have happened collectively before. The elected officials after action review is going to happen probably in January. We haven't been able to set dates with, or propose dates with, our consultants yet, so that'll be coming out shortly. And then the residents one will also be probably in the first quarter. Well, not probably, will be in the first quarter of 2025. Do you want to say like?
Go ahead, Ian. Ian, can you just remind us your role, because sometimes we lose track of that. So who are you, Ian?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ian Briscoe. I'm one of the 3 emergency program coordinators working in our emergency management department. And as Dan said, I've currently got the responsibility of leading our community recovery efforts, partnering with Colliers project leaders. I'm very thankful for their assistance. So just to kind of speak a little bit about the recovery parts so far. So back on the 7th of November, the RDCK was able to convene a coordination call with many different entities involved within the Argenta space, as well as the Slocan Valley space, many different community partners and individuals from some of the provincial ministries that we're going to be leaning on for some support as we lead these community recovery efforts. That was a very broad-based meeting, just really talking about some of the efforts that have already undertaken and really identifying the players within the space. Through that, we were able to create a forum that allowed individuals to provide some feedback regarding the meeting, and also the opportunity to volunteer to stand up and participate in 3 working groups that we've stood up. So we have 3 different sectors within the recovery that we're focusing on. The first being the economic space. So we're focusing on the economic recovery, and we're working with the ministry of JEDI. I can't remember exactly what the acronym is for, but I don't forget JEDI. And also some local partners like Community Futures, Central Kootenay, and also some other entities in that space, some local societies, the W.E. Graham Society in Slocan, as well as organizations like West Kootenay NavCare and things of that nature. The second working group is on social cultural, so really focusing on some of the more vulnerable members of our society and the profound impacts that the summer events have had on them, and trying to make sure that the cracks that may have previously existed don't become chasms to allow those people to fall further out of the social fabric, if you will. And also focusing on some of the cultural events that were impacted through these wildfires. So, those communities all have their own unique level of vibrancy, and a lot of that was put on pause throughout the summer. So we want to make sure that we're able to support those events to make certain that they don't disappear from our landscape in perpetuity, and that they are going to be there as good and as strong as they were prior to the 2024 for the summer of 2025. The third communications group that I'm leading is, working group that I'm leading is the communications team. And so we're just working, again, with a very diverse group of partners in that space to identify communication strategies, not only going forward, but also to have a little bit of a look on how we can improve communication going forward for the inevitability of events that are going to occur. We had all of those working group meetings on November 25th. I've actually just reviewed all of the meeting minutes today. They're going to be disseminated to our participants of those working groups later on this afternoon. And our second round of working group meetings will be taking place on December 9th. All 3 meetings are already set. And invites have been sent out.
Okay. So put my screen. I just realized how much more there was to go through. Did we say this meeting was ending at 2?
Yeah, we did go for 60 minutes, but
Okay.
it could be longer.
Quick show of hands
Recognizing.
for directors, just from a quorum perspective, who has to leave at 2? Okay, Hannah Graff, which would get us right at quorum. McLaren, Coban, and Bird Hewitt, are you good for another half hour?
Well, technically, it's almost 3 for me here, just to remind you.
Oh. 2 in the PST version of things. Sorry, I didn't actually note the 2 until now. Okay, so quickly, was there any questions in terms of what you just heard from our folks here? from anybody? McLaren Co, go ahead.
Just a quick question through the chair to Ian. There's been talk about doing an emergency resilience, a community resilience recovery plan here in the McCusp area. I was just wondering through Selkirk, Dr. Sarah Breen and Andrea Wilkie through Community Future Central Kootenay. And I was just wondering if you had heard about that.
Yeah, so both myself and Tanya were fortunate enough to be invited to a session that was co-hosted by Andrea Wilkie of Community Futures and Dr. Sarah Breen of Selkirk College regarding the economic resiliency planning. At this point in time, we are engaged with them and part of that conversation, and we're hoping that we can collaborate and coordinate our efforts, and then fortunately or hopefully enhance our capacity through those efforts. So yeah, we are aware of those things and are engaged with them and are expecting to be able to work together with them towards those initiatives.
Great, thanks very much.
I do know that Community Futures and the work that they're doing in our fire affected communities is directly related to our resiliency position in terms of that's where those connections are coming from, and then they work with people on the ground. That's what I've observed anyways. I had two quick questions. The post-disaster needs assessment and the community recovery plan, are either of those like documents, are either of those documents, will they become final, and are they made available to the elected officials at some point?
So yeah, so those documents are currently under development. So as we've been collecting or gathering more data as we meet with our working groups and other impacted community organizations, we're helping to use that data, fill in the PDNAs and fill in the gaps that we have, so those post-disaster needs assessments. And the recovery plan is a derivative of those PDNAs. So that document will be coming out. Regarding the dissemination of those documents, I'm not 100% certain. I believe Dan would be better equipped to be able to answer that question.
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I've never seen one. So
Okay.
like very transparently, this is the first time that I'm going to see what those documents look like. I think the parts that are going to be, they can be public, but there's no concerns around privacy or anything like that. I want to try to make it as much transparent as possible. And that goes also with the after action review report. So parts that can be public will be, and same thing with the recovery plan.
Right, yeah, I should have asked that, cognizant of FOIPA and freedom of information and what needs to remain private. So, okay, thank you. And just one more, because I don't think I know you guys because I was able to be in meetings with you, but Tanya, can you also just say hello and make sure people know who you are?
Absolutely. My name is Tanya Pauls, and I am also an emergency program coordinator for the Regional District of Central Kootenay. I'm based in Nelson here, along with Ian and Dan.
Okay, I'm so sorry. We should have done that at the beginning. I forget that because I had a fire, I got to meet everybody. So that's okay. And if anyone online wants to know someone who's speaking and I didn't do that, please just speak up. Okay, let's keep moving along. Everyone's okay for questions right now? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, we'll keep going. Hannah Graff, was there anything that you wanted to address before you have to go?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, when it was scheduled 1 till 2 and I booked something out.
Nope.
Sorry.
No, it's my fault. I totally lost track of the time, which I'm not supposed to do. So here we go. Go ahead, Dan.
Yes, and it's also my fault because once I saw how much was in my report, I should have proposed 90 minutes. We're going to get much better at this in 2025. I appreciate your flexibility.
Well, I'm glad we all know who to blame now.
Yes, exactly. Good. Thanks. Let the minutes reflect.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the projects in 2024, this will just be at a glance. So one of the things that was of importance to the emergency management program was obviously hiring a 30 PC, which we were able to do. And Ian started the week before our fires started. So it was literally trial by fire and very quickly scaling into a job that he has been great at. And same thing with Tanya starting in February. So it's a new emergency management program or team, and we went right into response, and it was very incredible how well the team did in that new kind of structure. We also completed a project at the Crescent Rec Center for IT, should it be used as a reception center that it required an IT upgrade, which was paid for through a SEP grant, and also has the benefit of being better for the rec center every other part of the year. And of course, we had a big wildfire season, so a lot of in EM when I'm doing planning with our work plans with our team, we always have to leave enough flexibility in the work plan that certain items have to be able to be flexible and shipped to another year depending on the type of response season we had. And so I did want to bring that up, kind of like a project. This at a glance section kind of articulates in a very condensed summary everything that I have in the following pages. So I'll just kind of launch into it. One of the things that happens when you have a significant activation is that you start seeing opportunities for improvement and that refinement piece that I was talking about. And some of that has to do with business continuity, which leads into that cloud-based system, which the rest of the RDCK is moving towards in the next few years. The EOC has been identified as, because it's a self-contained kind of unit, that it's easier to move to new technologies and do it more rapidly. So we're going to be moving most likely very soon to a SharePoint system instead of a file-based system where we have to have files on a server, which means we would be moving towards an EOC that can be extremely resilient. I think of it as an EOC in the box or EOC out of the back of the trunk of my car, where it can be established pretty much anywhere, as opposed to needing to have certain connections, certain servers that are available to us. So if we have an internet connection, we can have an EOC. And for the internet connection, we're putting in a SEP grant to be able to get a Starlink system, which is satellite based. So we're really looking forward to that. I brought up that sustainable rostering here because it is something that we need to figure out and how to do it in terms of model that looks at just the RDCK staff, but also looks at other opportunities, be it community-based, other partner agencies that can come in, or partners like other regional districts that can come in that already understand incident command system and how to run an EOC. The other part that we recognized is coming up with a more robust pay system, and all overtime is paid for through the province when it comes to EOC and is cost recoverable. But how we go about time tracking, how we go about ensuring that when staff leave and go back into their regular jobs, that they're not still incurring overtime, it's not cost recoverable, is something that became more evident this year. So I definitely want to look at that for this year. Developing Emergency Operations Center Duty Officer Program, which is similar to the Fire Services Duty Officer Program. Continuing to develop our standard operating guidelines so that when we are facing an event that we don't feel like we're reinventing the wheel each time, somebody can pick up the procedure and just follow from step 1 to Z and get it done. Addressing that gap with municipalities, so similar to Director Hewitt's question around what's that learning that we can do with our municipal partners. Part of that is having a package for them that they understand what's cost recoverable, what's not cost recoverable. You have a fire that starts adjacent to you. What can you do in order to prepare your municipality should the municipality need to evacuate and so on? And then a lot has already come out of the after action reviews. And so making time to start addressing the highest priorities or the lowest hanging fruit in what those outcomes are going to be. The ESS program did really, really, really well this year in being able to support the communities that were being evacuated. And we also, just like the EOC and going through that, we see that there's opportunities for refinement. So we're putting more staff time and more effort this year to policy development, recruitment, rethinking the delivery and structure of that particular ESS model. And so that'll be starting in 2020. Well, it's already started, but it will be continuing into 2025. Nora spoke about the Fire Smart program and trying to think about how we can address the fact that that rebate program didn't have as much funding as there were requests for it. So how can we start looking at FireSmart in a way that we're better addressing the interest that's coming back from community? Looking at a prioritization of our fuel treatments, obviously we're continuing with flood mitigation and exploring that question around how do we actually deliver this service in a sustainable way throughout the regional district. And there is a whack load of policy work coming at us as a result of changes that are coming at the provincial level. They're developing a all hazard risk tolerance, an all hazard policy, which for us, we also want to develop internally our risk tolerance policy. We have questions around that stem from EDMA, so the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, where they've defined emergencies a certain way. There's a whole bunch of those emergencies that as a regional district, we can't actually enforce. So what do we want to write as a policy that says, here's the stuff that we're going to address, here's the stuff that we're not going to address. Same thing when it comes to flood response. Is there any policy work that we want to say, these are the types of flood events that we are going to respond to, these ones we're not going to respond to. So there's some good policy work that's going to be needed. Then going back to that EOC staffing model, looking at how we as an emergency management program can work across regional districts like the RDCK and RDCK to share the workload of policy development, share the workload of advocacy, and share the workload of that happens during response just by being able to share, for example, like expenditure authorization forms. And what did you ask the province? How did you ask it? And you were successful in getting that money. Can I borrow your ADF? And throughout response, I had my laptop next to me while my computers were looking at everything that had to do with our response. I had my laptop next to me speaking with my colleagues at KB and EK so that we could be sharing information as the events were happening, which was extremely helpful. And how do we formalize something from that can already be in place next time we have response? EDMA is a massive wild card for us this year. In our work plan, I haven't put any hours into what EDMA is going to look like other than for Indigenous engagement requirements and for starting to develop more formality around the multi-jurisdictional emergency management organization or METMOs or whichever way you want to call that. And some very specific policy pieces that are articulated there around the delegation of authority matrices between our municipal partners and ourselves. And then looking at, this is a thought, I have not gotten board approval for this yet, to submit a proposal to drift the new disaster resilience and innovation funding for a region-wide hazard risk and vulnerability assessment or risk assessment before the regulations come out, because the hazards are going to be the same. So what can I get into place in preparation for that? The challenge with this particular funding stream is that the expressions of interest are due in September. So if you had a freshet season and a wildfire season, you have to be doing this. You have to be doing this thinking Q1 of the year. So that's on my mind. I'll stop there for a minute.
Okay. And while we pause for questions, just look at the rest of the report and see what you want to focus on, which is just next time we can work on piecemealing it together, and then we'll not mess ourselves up for time. Any questions from the table on what Dan just went over with you? No. I was curious about the HRVA, which one of my questions was, what was that? So hazard risk vulnerability assessment is HRVA, correct? So how does that feed into, or how does our 3-stream NDM National Disaster Mitigation Program, where we did the data collection, which I know has changed with the fires, but how does that work get used to inform the HRVA? Because we already know about, we have upwards of the most amount of watersheds in a regional district. We already know which ones are steep creek and high risk. And so how do we make sure that that data that's already been collected and determined as a risk get fed into this, and unfortunately likely increasing the amount of areas of risk, but that we don't lose sight of that we have a lot of data on hand?
Through the chair, that's an input. It's that simple. So the HRVA, the approach that I'd like to take is similar to what the RDCK has done, and they were able to get, in part, by partnering with their municipalities, they received $1.1 million to do their HRVA. So what I would hope to do, and this is still a half-baked thought, is do an all-hazard risk assessment or HRVA process, which when it comes to steep creeks and the overland flooding like we did with BGC, we would be using that information as the input into the HRVA. For hazards that we don't have that kind of detailed understanding yet, we would be getting through that contracting process subject matter experts to be able to develop the same kind of version, but for the different hazards to inform the HRVA.
Okay. Well, obviously that would end up in front of the board because we need the board to say yes. I'll just highlight that municipalities will want to identify how you work to identify hazards within a municipality.
Absolutely.
You know, and not to be specific to the one I know, but we know that the King Creek watershed is one of them, which is Caslow's water system in Area D. So I think you'd end up with multiple ones of that where it's not necessarily in a municipality, but it directly affects the municipal infrastructure in that municipality. So Nora has left as well. I'm just being aware of our time. For directors still online, any questions on this section? Because I'm going to get Dan to just focus on the areas of concern that he'd like to highlight. And then we need a few moments for public time. So are we good right now? We'll go into areas of concern. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Great, thank you. And that'll be where I'm going to stop the report is really the two areas of concern that I wanted to highlight because the rest of the report has been summarized into those few points that I gave. But before I jump into those two areas, what I want to point out is just kind of jumping into the staff workload. So I did a very thorough analysis this year with staff on what our workloads are looking like, and all of us are already at over 100% of workload. And so I'm extremely grateful at the board having recognized the workloads that we had and getting us a 30 PC. And that is all prior to needing to implement EDMA. So in the same way that I said last time we got an EPC is I'm going to come back when we have EDMA and say we need more staff. And then we need to think about how we go to the province to have that funded. It was that much more obvious when we did our analysis this year. So I'm just really grateful that we were able to do that. There's two areas, or it's not two areas, but it's two projects and policies and programs that I wanted to highlight that came in this year that are different and new. And I'm not going to get into too much detail because there's a board report that's going to be going in camera for this particular one for the cooperative community wildfire response model, so CCWRP, which is a new program that's come in from the province and looks something similar to what was done in Argenta this year, where you've got a community group. In this particular case, they're looking at having a society. So they have a set of criteria of who is able to be that kind of CCWR. And UBCM has attached funding that comes to that through the Fire Smart program, for better for worse, that allows each electoral area outside of fire protection area to receive up to $10,000 that can be distributed in a way that has not been identified by the province, and has put requirements on regional districts to be able to liaise between these societies and BC Wildfire in the time of response to where we're able to say they have the right PPE, personal protective equipment, they have the right training in order to be able to respond for BC Wildfire within a very specific set of constraints and scope of work. Staff will be talking about this as a concern in terms of jurisdictional boundaries of who's responsible for wildfire or for wildfire response outside of a fire protection area, how that now includes regional districts, how we're supposed to be liaising between BC Wildfire and these societies. Like, The long and short of it is that we've been wedged between the province and these societies with a whole lot of work that didn't used to be ours. And so there's going to be a recommendation. There's going to be a more fulsome report coming in December for board, as well as a recommendation for staff on how to go about navigating that.
I'm just gonna pause you for a sec, just to note that, generally when we know something's coming in camera, we wouldn't necessarily reference, but the reason is because it's gonna involve the classification of personnel, which means it has to be in camera. But the conversation around this program is, it's a BC program. And I'll just note, because I think there's some misunderstanding in the public around, Argenta had, no one within the regional district gave them permission, nor did they do anything to train them or anything like that. So I'm actually funding them to do presentations on how to do what they did, absent of where you have a fire service. Where you have a fire service, go and work with the fire department. That's the big difference here, where we do have jurisdiction. So it's a very complicated, it's awesome the province is doing this. I just wanted the directors to know that we should really hold that discussion for when we'll have it with the board. There's a lot yet to learn about it. And it is a tricky one because it becomes a personnel, which means we have to talk about it in camera before we can have an open discussion about it. So I just want us to be cautious over that discussion at this time. But we are really, like, the province and us are like, how do we get this to work? So that's the good news, and the province recognized it right away. So that's great news. Short story is we don't need to be in the mix. That's my opinion, but that's my opinion, and I'll stop there. They did great. They were awesome. So sorry, Dan, I just wanted to, it's a complex one because being required to have personnel puts us in awkward positions. And sorry, directors, did you want to add anything to that or say anything, even though I said we're going to talk about it later? Susan, go ahead, Director Hewitt.
Not directly on this, but you said that this is a public meeting, so the materials that we've got in the package can be shared with staff. Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll go ahead and just let Maya know that when you send the minutes, include this report, and I'll make sure at executive that this is received on the board agenda so the whole board gets it as well. Good catch. So I'll get you to keep going then on the other area of concern.
Great, and I did, just to take the opportunity to, I wanted to put this in the report because there is a public piece to it. I get a lot of phone calls about it, so I want people to know that we are discussing it and that it also connects into our workloads. So it's an important piece as we're thinking about our work plan that will be coming up potentially depending on how we go about it in 2025. The second piece,
yeah, go ahead.
in our areas of concern is something that we've coined, thanks to the province, third-party wildfire resources. And individually, we might have gotten, or some of us might have gotten a letter from our insurance companies last summer that said that given your insurance policy, you're going to be receiving just-in-time fire smarting or structure protection from a third-party wildfire resource that will be coming should you be in an evacuation order area, or should your home be in an evacuation order area. We were the first local authority in British Columbia to experience that this summer. And it took an incredible amount of time for me as EOC director to figure out alongside the policy group if and how we were going to be bringing or allowing these folks into evacuation order areas. And it was quite challenging. And since then, at the end of the summer, the province came out with an interim standard operating guideline on how regional districts and local authorities should be welcoming or integrating third-party wildfire resources into the response. And it has a whole heck of a lot of complications to it, just in terms of oversight, liability, because they're coming in from the states, and then that clarity around who's in charge of who and how do they communicate with one another. So the integration of their plans with the incident action plan that BC Wildfire has, this is another example of us being put in the middle of BC Wildfire and an external agency, and us being asked to coordinate and ensure, like for example, in my insurance company, you'd have to be able to ensure that whoever the policyholder is has said yes to that third-party wildfire resource to go onto their land, which just gets the regional district into a complicated area. So there's a chance for us to be able to provide feedback through our associations, and I'm trying to get that done. But that's something that this is the future of wildfire response in Canada, or at least in British Columbia. It seems like they were also in Alberta this year, but it's coming, and we're going to have to deal with it. And it's going to be another staffing resource or another strain on staffing resources from inside the OC. That's it.
I think, and that one noted, we'll see more on that one. This is a really good example of what Director Vandenberg was indicating around, like bringing in these, there's people with training that can be really helpful, but being the entity that has to vet them and then ensure they know what an IC, an incident command process is, and that BC Wildfire Service knows who to talk to is a pretty impossible task. Adding in that we then need permission from landowners based on their policy means we would have to know something about whose policies are what. And that is well beyond what we should legally have access to, let alone the manpower to access. So that to me is the biggest of your areas of concern. And I do look forward to what you have to say in terms of when that comes to the board. So I don't know if there's any questions we can really ask on it right now. Ian, are you looking to say something? No, sorry. I tend to read people's body language a little too much sometimes.
I'm probably more interested than I should be.
Oh no, I just listened to 7 hours of Columbia River Treaty stuff and I'm like, oh my God, this is so interesting. A lot of people don't think so. Directors, do you have any questions at this time? Okay. Those are two really big topics. So it's good for us to have a heads up on them. I think generally what this group would be giving any kind of like guidance on where to go, and I would just say like take it to the board and do your best with it. The concerns are obvious, so I think that would be our general input. So in terms of the rest of your report, we have about 10 minutes left. We do have public time, and we do have terms of reference on the agenda. So is there anything else on your report you wanted to? Okay, the report will go to the board, so I can anticipate that there could be questions at that time, and we'll make sure you're available or someone is. I think for the terms of reference one, I just wanted this committee in its current form to understand why that has not been updated so long and essentially where we're going with it. And it's going to be a standing item until Edma's through, essentially. So if you could just give us what's the deal with the terms of reference?
Sure, thank you through the chair. So this committee is struck through our bylaw. So the executive program or the emergency program executive committee is struck through bylaw. And from there, we have a terms of reference that was developed, I think it was in 2016, the last time that it was updated. And it has received internally to our team, and this started with Chris Johnson, with my predecessor, and John Stefan, working on what that terms of reference should evolve to based on some edits that are needed. Let's say the function isn't clear and is in some cases not aligned with what this committee should actually be doing, and we're aware of it, and we're working with this committee in how it should be, not necessarily how the terms of references are at this point. Mm-hmm. So there's a high need to change it, but because EDMA's going to be coming, it should have its regulations out in 2025, the intention is to update this committee's bylaw and terms of reference at the same time as EDMA comes out, so that there's only, so that we're only going for the bylaw update once, and then the terms of reference flow from that. So the edits are mostly already done of what we want to do until we understand what the regulations are and how those will influence the terms of reference. That should, in theory, be done in 2025. Should we be getting the regulations done? And if I can add, one of the things that I hope to explore with the committee is the fact that membership is only a single year. And I wonder whether or not that is the best way to do it, given that there's a lot of education that you each take in when it comes to emergency management, and if 1 year makes sense. But that's something that we can explore, obviously, when we do the terms of reference.
Yeah, it's evident of how long this act has been under review. It was 2013, actually, the year after I was elected, that we last updated. I think any of it. And all along, we've been like, this is, we're out of date, but until we get the new regulations, we can't update it because we don't know what duties we're going to be delegated. And I think you're right on the membership, but we can see what Edma tells us about what we need. The other clarification I wanted to make is we have the emergency program executive, which is kind of like overview, that sense of like, work plan and some policy guidance. It is not the same as a post-incident policy group that gathers to discuss the incidents, such as like when we were in an active EOC and we could have been on a call with the areas affected, plus myself as chair. So that's a different entity, and that is situational basis. That's not an ongoing committee. That's when we have an incident and you have the directors involved, likely their CAOs if it's a municipality, and that's based on a situation. So the two are different. Any questions from the committee at this time? Okay. More to come on that one. I will now then go to see if we have any questions we have one member of the public. You've been so patient. Do you have any questions for us? Go ahead and unmute. Okay. Well, then I'll just check back in with staff if there's anything that you were cut off from wanting to say that you needed to say.
No, thank you. I just really appreciate, I know we haven't met very often this year, and we had the response season kind of wedge itself in between our meetings. So I'm looking forward to refining our kind of meeting schedule and flow for 2025 and how to best utilize this committee's perspective.
Great. Directors, any last questions? Now that it's almost 3:30 for Vandenberg. It's dinner time. It must be dark over there. Okay, then I'll take a motion to adjourn. Hewitt. McLaren Co. debate. All those in favor? All right, see you guys later. Thank you.